Hello everyone. So this video popped up in my feed. Adventures of Mayflower passenger John Howland. Now I know some about him. Fascinating. I won't give any more away unless they don't say, which they should. So let's get into it.
What does Mayflower pilgrim John Howland have in common with Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the musical Hamilton, and the love scene from the Titanic? Stick around till later in the video and I'll show you.
And don't leave out the love story.
Today I want to look at bits of John Howland's life and uncover two themes for further investigation. I'm also going to talk about his wife Elizabeth Tilley, although the Tilley family will have its own episode later in the season. This is a little water runoff pond. It's near my house. It's about as much water as I care to deal with in one place at one time. I can't imagine taking the Mayflower across the Atlantic Ocean, but that's exactly what John Howland did back in 1620, and then he fell overboard during a storm. I don't know if this was his first big adventure in life, but it certainly wasn't his last. He went on to be an explorer, a fur trader, he was involved once in a gunfight, and he may have protected some Quakers from New World persecution. On September 2, 1911, the annual meeting of the Society of the Descendants of Pilgrim John Howland of the ship Mayflower took place at the Samoset House in Plymouth, Massachusetts. The members were met by the secretary, and then they paid a visit to the grave of John Howland and went to see the old Howland house on Sandwich Street. And then dinner was served just before the meeting at 1 p.m. We know all of this because of a quarterly magazine called The Howland Homestead. I wonder what they discussed at this meeting. Maybe they talked about how proud they were to be descended from the 13th signer of the Mayflower Compact, someone who was involved in government affairs and leadership at Plymouth. We do know that they discussed the purchase of the Jabez Howland house. It was at one time owned by John's son, and they raised enough money to purchase it. This home is now a museum that you can visit. Historians aren't sure of John's exact birth date. The John Howland Society says maybe 1592 or 3. Over at MayflowerHistory.com, Caleb Johnson thinks that he was born closer to 1599. Howland was from Dunstanton, Huntington, England. He came over as John Carver's manservant, which many historians translate to mean an indentured servant. Other sources suggest that perhaps he was more like Carver's personal secretary.
Hold your horses. What about when you fell in the water?
So what about that fall overboard off of the Mayflower? Author Nathaniel Philbrick writes about this in his book Mayflower, a story of courage, community, and war. As the Mayflower lay a hull, Howland apparently grew restless down below. He quickly discovered that the deck of a tempest-tossed ship was no place for a landsman. The shriek of the wind through the rope rigging was terrifying, as was the sight of those towering spume-flecked waves. The Mayflower lurched suddenly to leeward. Howland staggered to the ship's rail and tumbled into the sea. William Bradford also wrote about this event in his History of Plymouth Plantation, saying that as John sank into the sea, he reached out and caught hold of the topsail halyards, and the crew pulled him out with the aid of a boat hook. I don't know much about sailing, but it appears that halyards are big ropes used to raise and lower the sails, and when the sails are down as they would be in a storm, the ropes drag down into the water. I wanted to get an idea of what halyards might look like, so I turned to the 1952 classic movie, The Plymouth Adventure. This is a Hollywood account of the Mayflower's Atlantic voyage that I've mentioned before. When you watch it, remember that it's fictionalized and don't believe everything you see on screen. I do think it helps with imagining what the ship might have been like. You can see here they're unrolling the sails, and here they're raising them. So my best guess is that those big ropes they're pulling might be the halyards. If you're a sailor, maybe you can come into the comments and let me know. Let's do a search for what if John Howland had drowned. Here's here's one. If John Howland had drowned, he wouldn't have gone on to help found Plymouth Colony, marry fellow passenger Elizabeth Tilley, and produce 10 children and 88 grandchildren, from whom millions of Americans descend, including Presidents Franklin D. Roosevelt, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. And what's this? Mayflower Rescue alters American history. The theory is that if John had drowned, none of these people would have existed, nor the rest of his 2 million descendants, including some of you who are watching this video today. But is that really true? That's my first theme for exploration today. Let's say one of your 12 times great-grandfathers just plain did not exist, keeping in mind that you could potentially have several thousand 12th great-grandpas to choose from. Does this really mean you wouldn't exist, or does it just mean you would have a different ancestor and perhaps you would prefer peas over broccoli, or have brown hair instead of blonde?
To me, it means I wouldn't exist. My grandfather wasn't here, my dad wouldn't be here. I was made in my dad's balls. So it's hard to believe that I could somehow transfer somewhere else. It's a very crude way of putting it, but you understand what I'm saying.
It would be a fun philosophical conversation to take up with one of your older kids or grandkids around the dinner table one evening. In the spring of 1621, John Carver and his wife Catherine both died. And this must have been very tough on 13-year-old Elizabeth Tilley. Her parents had already passed away, and the Carvers had taken her in, and now they were gone as well. Many sources state that John Howland inherited John Carver's property and became Elizabeth Tilley's guardian, and then other sources say, well, that's conjecture. They do all seem to agree that John and Elizabeth were married around 1624. The Plymouth colonists needed to make enough money to compensate the investors who funded their trip and to continue to find ways to profit in the New World. At first, they thought they would do that by fishing off the coast, but there were already fishing enterprises in the area. Stiff competition, so they turned to other endeavors, and one of those was the fur trade. And this is the second theme that I suggest for further exploration today: fur trading in North America. Here's an interesting article from the Montana Trappers Association. The fur trade began in the 1500s as an exchange between the Indians and Europeans. The Indians traded furs for such goods as tools and weapons. Beaver fur, which was used in Europe to make felt hats, became the most valuable of these furs. It seems that beaver fur was so popular in Britain that it had already been hunted to extinction. And before we were finished with our trapping here in North America, we also hunted the beaver to near extinction. Plymouth Colony was granted a patent for the fur trading post in Maine along the Kennebec River. Howland ran the post for a number of years. According to author Rebecca Fraser, the Indians navigated by canoe the many small rivers of the Kennebec watershed. At a time without horses, the innumerable waterways of Maine meant they could travel wherever they pleased. Skilled canoeists traveled hundreds of miles a day, utilizing the rapids and a system of portage routes which were thousands of years old. I can't think of a better place to set a children's adventure book than at this trading post. With Howland and the other men, we could add a 13-year-old boy into the mix there at the post. Let's give him a good Puritan name. How about Gideon? Gideon could learn to use a canoe, he could befriend a boy from the local tribes, and he could go on expeditions with the men. And he could be a witness to what was probably one of the most jarring parts of Howland's fur trading career.
He could probably witness all those beavers they were trying to trap. People don't know this, but I think those beavers are responsible for building the Hoover Dam. Now, I don't have any proof, but they are beavers. You're with me. You agree.
It's 1634. Gideon's out practicing his tracking skills. He's slipping quietly through the forest when he hears a commotion. He looks down to the river below, and he sees that a man from the neighboring plantation named John Hocking is blocking the entire waterway with his boat. Native Americans coming down the river are trying to get past Hocking to bring their furs to the trading post, but they can't get through. So Gideon races back through the forest to alert John Howland, and then he races back to his overlook and watches as Howland asks Hocking to leave. But Hocking refuses, And then Howland sends some men to cut the cables anchoring Hawking's boat, and a scuffle ensues, and Gideon watches in horror as Hawking pulls out his gun and puts it to the head of one of Howland's men. He hears Howland call out, "Don't shoot him, he was only following my orders. If you must shoot somebody, shoot me." But Hawking ignores Howland and pulls the trigger. There's a whole lot more to this story than I can cover here today. Let's go to a search engine and type Hawking Howland 1634. Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff comes up. And also check the video description for a link to further information. Two of John Howland's brothers, Arthur and Henry, moved to Plymouth a few years after John. They were Quakers. When you think of Quakers now, you probably think of just another group of Protestants. But in New England, they were known as the cursed sect of heretics, commonly called Quakers. My ninth great-grandfather was a man named Thomas Prince. He was governor at the time. He's not my favorite great-grandfather, by the way. He was particularly inflexible about going after these heretics. It's possible that John occasionally had to step in to help protect his brothers from Prince's long arm of the law. Just another adventure in his long list of adventures. John Howland and Elizabeth Tilley lived in Plymouth for a number of years before moving briefly to Duxbury and finally to Kingston. They had 10 children: Desire, John, Hope, Elizabeth, Lydia, Hannah, Joseph, Jabez, Ruth, and Isaac. And after John died in 1673, Elizabeth moved in with her son Jabez until her death in 1687.
Will you tell us the story again? Sure again.
Now, what does John Howland have to do with Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the musical Hamilton, and the love scene from the Titanic? When you're looking at history with kids, they always seem to pay more attention if you can make the history fun and use some current cultural references. And that's exactly what Dave Sedgwick did with a group of cousins and their grandparents for a homegrown musical he released this past Thanksgiving.
But those Pilgrim ladies are looking pretty fine, am I right?
This video has it all: fun, love, and King James singing to the Pilgrims. Really, I think you'll enjoy it. Check the video description below for links to all of the articles and videos I've mentioned today. For a good children's book about John Howland with really great illustrations, look for The Boy Who Fell Off the Mayflower by P.J. Lynch.
Okay, so this wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I thought it'd be a little more John Howland, but it's more for children. We watch, we learn. Sometimes it is what it is. All right, I'm going to end this here, and I'm going to go get some dinner. All right, sounds good. There's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate. You don't have to. Subscribe, click the bell, and thumbs up. That's all I ask. If you can't donate and you're not subscribed, do that. Can't donate and you're subscribed, click the thumbs up. Click a thumbs up just to be nice. Until next time, have a good day, have a good night.